normal. No other issues were there. And anti-segment examination, I would like to show you here that the pupil was superiorly decentered, and the iris was, of course, covering the central part of the pupil. And in the superior part, the iris appear adherent to the incision. And also, I can see a fibrous band, which was probably vitreous, which was going into the incision. And in this patient, yak capsulotomy was already done. So posterior capsule was already open. There was little bit of tilt in the IOL when I saw the patient on the slit lamp. So that's why the corneal astigmatism, I will show it there, that it was just -1, but the patient was accepting -2 cylinder. So you can see here closely, there is a fibrous band which is going into the incision, old incision. So for last almost, this is the corneal serious images, and which shows that the corneal thickness is adequate, more than 552. So corneal refractive procedure is possible. And as you can see, cylinder here is -1, but he was accepting -2, maybe because of the tilt in the IOL. Rest of the ocular examination for refractive purpose was normal, and as expected, the pupillometry was showing decentration of the pupil uh, as compared to the left eye, so it was superiorly decentered. And for last 10 years, basically, he was using his other eye for his studies and other things, and he never felt the need to correct this particular eye for even for refractive error. He was not wearing any glasses, but now he got job, and the job requirement was that he should have at least 6/9 unaided vision in the other eye, while one eye was 6/6 already. So in this case, what will you do? So I would like to, involve the other panelists and other participants if they would like to, opine on this particular case. That in this scenario, what will be your decision? How you will go about treating this particular patient?
Can we do single pass 4-throw pupilloplasty in such case, Saurabh?
Yeah, actually, the main issue is the pupil is decentered. So
yes, but we have seen a lot of videos of Dr. Amar in which he has shown that even the decentered pupil, he uses vitrectomy to enlarge it, and then he sutures the wound.
Correct.
So if you don't have access to lasers and other things, I think that's a approach which a common ophthalmologist can think of.
Yes. So cutting the pupil basically inferiorly, and then doing the single pass.
Yes. And even I think Dr. Hardipurkar has also shown one same video on pupilloplasty recently in recent webinars. I think there is a lot of talk about pupilloplasty. So I would like to know opinion of the esteemed panel, whether anybody has the experience of pupilloplasty.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you.
Right.
So apart,
so here it's a very interesting case, obviously challenging. So here the problems with the case or his symptoms are twofold. As you very rightly said, one is of course the pupil, because it is upward drawn. It is there's a fibrotic adhesion there superiorly, and it's pulled up so much that the visual axis is covered. Otherwise, it would not be so important. Of course, then is the refractive error that he has. Okay, so it's a twofold thing. Do you know if there was any change, if you dilated the pupil, if you with T plus or anything, did it dilate sufficiently to uncover the visual axis?
It was dilating to uncover the visual axis. I also refracted after dilatation, but I was expecting some improvement in visual acuity actually after dilatation. But unfortunately, he didn't show any improvement. So I was, little hesitant to go ahead with because he wanted 6/9 unaided vision. That was his job. This thing. But of course, we have to correct the refractive part at least. That is the only way I was thinking. And of course, the refractive error was high. So if you see, the spherical equivalent was -8. So I was expecting some improvement in vision.
Improvement, yes. Yes. So can you explain why? Yeah, go ahead.
Did you do a contact lens trial? Because that sometimes gives you the
contact lens trial is always useful.
Yeah. I think contact lens would have been better. I think one of the reasons for his low vision was also that the visual axis was not like covered, or he was using a different axis basically, not the central. So most likely he had a separation of the image of the right eye. Obviously, he was not using glasses for a long time, and when he was using glasses, like if I do refraction trial also, I think he was not using this eye for seeing when he is seeing binocularly, because the other eye has much better visual acuity, and also this eye, the visual axis, the normal visual axis is already blocked.
Right.
So because of that, and also the IOL is, there is a tilt in the IOL. So I don't have a very sophisticated aberrometer. So that might have, shown some amount of aberrations in the form of coma or something like that, which might have also affected the visual acuity.
Okay, so I think I'd request Saurabh to go ahead and tell us how he managed the case. I mean, since this is supposed to be a competition, let's finish with the case presentation and then we can throw it open to a discussion. Yeah.
Okay. So is it visible now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is how I solved it. So of course, as Dr. Santosh sir was saying, that the first important thing is to bring the pupil in the center, because if I'm thinking of a piggyback IOL, for example, ICL, IPCL, or maybe a Sulcoflex lens to correct this particular error, the pupil has to be in the center, because even if I'm using a piggyback IOL, the optic size normally is 6 millimeters, and if it is at the edge, then again the patient may have some problem, and I may not be able to correct it completely. If I'm going to plan a corneal refractive surgery, again the pupil has to be in the center, because that is the treatment zone that we are usually using for corneal refractive procedures. I will just go ahead. So I decided first stage to do pupilloplasty, because after doing pupilloplasty, maybe I will have a better idea how to go about. And also I wanted to check what is the position of the IOL inside. So there was a tilt. So I was not sure. As you can see, even with the best dilatation, I could not see the haptics very clearly. So either both the haptics are in the sulcus, or one haptic is in the bag and one haptic in the sulcus. Because if both the haptics are in the sulcus, then maybe even IOL exchange becomes one of the options. But if one haptic is there in the bag and another is in the sulcus, and also if you can see after traumatic cataract, there is a lot of fibrosis also, and there is vitreous also. So I think IOL exchange I ruled out on table. And you can see I cut the vitreous band which was there. I also released the iris from the incision to make it center, but it was still not centering. You can see the blue mark is basically the visual axis which I have marked initially. So I then decided to cut open the inferior part of the iris so that the pupil centers. Now on table, I decided not to place any pupilloplasty suture, because I didn't know how it will work, like whether it will again decenter the pupil, or that's why I decided that let the pupil be. First thing I wanted to do is that visual axis should be open. No, because this patient has very irregular pupil, and so pupil tracker will not be working with the regular excimer laser. So after 3 weeks, I decided that I will go ahead with SMILE. Now the advantage of SMILE in this particular case is that no pupil tracking is needed. It's not there. So patient can fix himself on the visual axis, so which he could do during the procedure. And SMILE procedure per se was uneventful. So I corrected whatever refraction he was accepting after the first pupilloplasty procedure. And I was surprised to see that he had in fact unaided 6/6 parts vision, which was even more than what I was expecting. So that's the case. And I told the patient after the first pupilloplasty or opening, I would say, that I may have to take another suture later, maybe after a month or so, if you are having glares or halos or something like that. So this was 6 months later when he came back for his follow-up. I could see that the pupil was reacting to light, and he had absolutely no visual phenomena as such, no glares, halos. He was absolutely comfortable. And also it might be that because it was a non-dominant eye for that patient now, the other eye was taking over. So he was not having any glares or other. So I left it just like that. So in future, I told that if you have any such issues, I will always tackle the large pupil anytime. So that was the end of my case presentation.
I request the judges to start the discussion, please.
Right. So I think you've managed this extremely well. Excellent. The visual outcome was, like you said, beyond your own expectations. But for a good discussion, what would be the other option? How did you counsel the patient, and how did you come to the conclusion that SMILE would be probably the best option for you?
Actually first I had a couple of options which I had given to patient that I told that first I will do pupilloplasty because I have to see inside what is the status of the IOL. As I said, even the IOL exchange, of course the posterior capsule was open, but I have done a lot of IOL exchanges despite that. So that was one of the options, because if I could do IOL exchange, for example, if the haptics were in the sulcus, then very easy to cut it, remove it from the anti-segment and replace it with a proper IOL. And that would have corrected without touching the cornea also, and that would have corrected, and even the patient would have got good vision. That was one option. But on table, I realized the one of the haptic was completely fibrosed and it like in the capsular bag, and one haptic was in the sulcus. So now to cut it out, and it's difficult. And also there was a vitreous strand which was going in, so I didn't want to touch the IOL per se. Second option which I had kept in mind, of course not in the first sitting, was I can go ahead with toric ICL or maybe a toric sulcoplex or sulcus fixated, some sulcus IOL. But again, I'm not very comfortable with toric ICL to be placed in pseudophakic eyes. I have done couple of cases, but I find that they are not that stable as far as toricity is concerned. But of course, that was one of the options. But here I thought that one haptic is in the sulcus and another is in the back. So again, I don't know, after placing the ICL, if the ICL again tilts or causes some irritation to the iris or something, one possibility. So I said that cornea is okay for corneal refractive procedure. So let me think of corneal refractive procedure, which is easier to do. Now, LASIK, of course, was quite tough because pupil tracking will not work. So if anyone has any idea, like without pupil tracking, if anybody has done in any case, that will be worth listening to. But SMILE was, of course, easiest to do because I don't have to depend on any tracking. Patient can fix himself, and cornea was perfect for doing SMILE. So that's why I decided to go ahead with SMILE, which gave me good results.
Excellent.
So, obviously, excellent results, Dr. Saurabh. There's no other way around it. Few questions. So, could you explain why you think that even though pre-operatively you said the vision was not improving, but post-operatively it improved? Was it actually that the iris and pupil was still coming in the way? Do you think that was the reason?
If you could, like when I showed the surgical video of pupilloplasty, even with tropicasil or the maximum dilatation, the visual axis was just opening. So most probably in the, in real life, it was never uncovered. It was not uncovered.
Yes.
So I think that, and of course, we have all seen that if there is prolonged suppression, there is some amount of amblyopia which stays with the patient.
True.
Which, sometimes after correction of the refractive error, it improves. Also, I think another thing which as I was explaining, if the light rays are, entering the eye in a different angle, so that itself might be creating some aberrations, which is reducing the quality as well as the visual acuity in that patient. So maybe a better aberrometry would have given me much better idea why the patient was having poor vision.
True. Probably not a suppression, but definitely it could be the pupil there. Now, if you did have to do, after releasing the additions which were there, here the pupil seemed to be around 5 millimeters. That's what it looked like on the video, at least after you finished.
Yeah.
But if it was larger and you did have to do a pupilloplasty, what technique would you have preferred, and any particular reason for that?
So I think two options were there. One was the purse string, which would have been better because it constricts the pupil all 360 degree around. Or other option is two single pass pupilloplasty. So
So I agree in this case, because at the end, after releasing it, it was a fairly roundish pupil. Yeah, purse string or even a single pass fourth row could have worked, but since it was not irregular, it was fairly round at the end of it. Both of these would have worked. One more comment would be that can you explain why he didn't feel any glare and halos?
I think the pupil was reactive, and under scotopic condition, it was not also dilating. So it was like 5 millimeter and then constricting to maybe 4 millimeter in bright light. While night, it was, I think, staying the same. It was not like dilating fully. So
another thing worth looking at, yes.
So most likely it was like a fixed, rigid kind of pupil, which it has become.
So another thing worth looking at probably, or trying to explain this, would have been what his other eye pupil is like, and maybe his other eye also has a mesopic or a scotopic pupil, which is similar in size, and it's not something which is causing him a problem. But yes, overall, very well managed case.
Thank you. I think other eye also I have shown the pupillometry.
Yes, I saw that. It was similar. Yes, I saw that.
Just one last comment, like to assess the visual outcome of a patient, if I had to treat this patient, I would have definitely given him either RGP or a soft contact lens trial with a dilated pupil and then put in a pinhole. And sometimes you can get closest to whatever is the expected visual outcome, and that would have given you the confidence. So
yeah, perfect. I think that was in the plan. The patient was in a lot of hurry. Of course, trial would have been better, not prescribing. Trial I would have done and could have got the possible outcome. But I thought anyway I have to do the procedure because the patient wants some correction. So I think it's good that ultimately I was happy.
Yeah. So probably the only difference there was after your pupilloplasty. Ideally, you should have, if the vision was still not recovering, in spite of you increasing the pupil size, then you could have thought, it would be a extra step to think whether you need to go ahead with the refractive. So there, the contact lens trial would have been very useful as doctor.
But the thing was, contact lens trial is good, but I did a mental calculation because the spherical equivalent was -8. So I think correction should double the visual acuity. I mean, because the visual angle is double. So I was expecting 6/9 parts or something like that.
No, what I mean by trial is not a dispensing trial.
I got it. Yeah.
The visual potential.
Yeah.
The potential is very important.
Yeah.
Yes, very well managed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mukesh, do we take any audience questions? There were a couple.
Ma'am, I think there were a couple of audience questions, but I would request that we can do it at the end because we have already passed that particular time a lot actually. So I request that we move on to the next case, and in the end, we will certainly have discussion again.
I think some of them have been answered anyway through the discussion. Yeah, we'll move on.
Yeah. So we'll go to the next case presenter. Next case presenter is a very own POS, very young, dynamic surgeon from Pune, Dr. Natasha Pahuja. She is now a professor, Dr. Natasha Pahuja, pardon me, because she has just completed her PhD, and she has got multiple numerous presentations. She is a clinician scientist amongst us. So without further wasting any time, let's call upon Dr. Natasha Pahuja, please.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Dr. Mukesh. And thank you, Dr. Geetanjali and Dr. Mukesh, for letting us be a part of this academic feast. I hope this virtual meet is finding everybody in good health and great spirits. Without further ado, I will start with the case presentation. Okay, so my case is, if people have seen this movie called Inside Out, it's an animated movie. It's about having different emotions. This is what I felt during this case. I have no financial interest to disclose. So there was this case, a 23-year-old male who came for, he specifically came for SMILE. He traveled from Nasik, and this was his refractive error preoperatively. His best corrected vision was 6/6, stable refractive error for 4 years. So I was quite happy because he directly came and he said, I want SMILE. So the first thing that I did was topography. The topography seemed appropriate to go ahead with SMILE. This is his left eye, looked fairly regular. So, and had enough pachymetry for the refractive correction. So, but because he had a -1.5 diopter cylinder, decided to do the cyclotorsion compensation. So this is the reticule that we saw, and um, so on marking preoperatively with the UV allowing marker, I did the cyclotorsion compensation by marking at 0 and 180 and rotated the suction applanation cone at 0 and 180, looking at the reticule. And after that, it was a fairly regular smile surgery as what is expected. I'm just going to go ahead because that's not the interest of the case. So post-operatively, this was interesting. Post-op day 3, I saw him myself. His unaided visual acuity was 6/6. His IOP was normal, but he was complaining of slight glare. This was his post-operative medication. He was on fluoromethalone, an antibiotic, a lubricant, and cyclosporin. This is the standard post-operative medications that I have for smile. The only thing that he was complaining was slight glare. I explained him that this is quite expected. Sometimes it happens post-operative day 3 to a week also. So just give it some time and it'll get all right. So he goes back to Nasik very happy without glasses. But he calls me in a while, in 3 days, very disgusted, and he says the vision is still the same, but the glare is persisting. I told him, don't worry, I told you already. I've counseled him again. But what he did was he went to another doctor. This gave me a lot of fear. And I was also a little saddened that, he had to go to some other doctor over there, and what impression he'll create of me. I did not manage the case properly. So, but the doctor was very happy, and he said, everything looks perfectly all right. It's just that the patient, his vision is 6/6, but he's complaining of glare. So I asked the doctor to explain the patient that it could be epithelial remodeling. Just give him some time, let him wait, increase the lubricant. So that's what he did. And the patient didn't call me back for quite some time. And I assumed that the patient is all right. He didn't go to the doctor also. But my fear increased because he came 6 weeks post-smile. His vision had decreased. The interesting part is he had almost the same amount of cylinder that we had started with preoperatively. And this was a little scary for me because I couldn't justify as to why this happened. By that time, the patient was very, very angry. I could not basically figure out as to what is the reason for his drop in vision. But interesting thing was his pinhole vision was improving to 6/6 in both eyes. So I wanted to evaluate the case further and how to explain this. That is, pre-op and post-op is the same. So after a lot of brainstorming, I went and did all the tests. So I was expecting probably he has got very early ectasia, but his topography looked absolutely normal and what is expected post-refractive surgery. I ruled out epithelial remodeling also. So the epithelium is healed completely all right as what is expected 6 weeks post-smile. I thought maybe he's gone into accommodative spasm. So based on that, I followed the protocol, looked for accommodative spasm, but it did not create too much change. And he was still persistently complaining of glare. So I went and examined him again on the slit lamp examination because I was absolutely clueless as to what is happening. The interesting thing here is that I found a little black streak in the interface, which was suggestive of interface fluid. So I went and got his IOP checked on ORA, non-applanation tonometry, and his pressures were 25 and 27, just on fluoromethalone. So I simply put him on dorzolamide and oral acetazolamide. And here's the interesting thing. Just 48 hours later, me doing nothing, not changing anything else, just adding anti-glaucoma medications, his refractive error came back to absolutely, close to normal. The interesting thing here was that he was very, very happy. The interesting thing that we need to notice here is that unfortunately, I did an OCT after starting the medications. So I could just see small fluid pockets that were still persistent 48 hours later, as seen by the arrows here. So by the end of it, just by starting these medications, the patient was very happy. I was very happy. I didn't have to recorrect. And I went back to literature to see that interface fluid syndrome, although has been published very well in LASIK, there are only 2 case reports that happen in SMILE. And this was one of the cases that I experienced. And what I learned from this entire exercise is that everything goes very well preoperatively and intraoperatively. We don't have to leave the patients post-op, at least image it post-op. And we have to rule out accommodative spasm in such cases who come back with the refractive error. I tend to always, at least in SMILE, I tend to always mark if the refractive error is more than 0.75. If what I've also noticed is that if there's a myopic shift or a slight astigmatism, it could be interface fluid syndrome. Another important thing, if you don't have ORA or Corvus, it would be wise to check the intraocular pressure in the periphery of the cornea, not in the zone where the refraction has been treated. Also interesting, it would be interesting to look at the pachymetry changes. So if the pachymetry is increasing as expected to the amount of refractive error that we're correcting, and you see that after starting the anti-glaucoma medications, the pachymetry resolves, that would be a good indicator or a surrogate marker that it was probably the interface fluid. One thing that I've learned in this exercise is that I was thinking it has been my fault and that I've not calculated the refractive error properly. And I was in a hurry to go and recorrect. But it would be wise to wait and watch and not jump as regression, immediate regression, or a mistake from our part. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Judges can start the discussion, please.
Sharon, would you like to?
Yeah. So great presentation, Natasha. As always a pleasure to see you present. So a few things, okay. How did the slit lamp evaluation of this patient look on that first day, 3 days post when they first started complaining of glare? How did it appear to you? Did it look like a normal SMILE post-op that you saw, or was there a little haze that was visible there at that time?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for pointing it out. The patient had slight haze. I'll be very honest. On the third post-operative day, the patient had a little epithelial irregularity also. That was because intraoperatively, when I was trying to dock, because of the cyclotorsion compensation, I had to dock 3 times. Because the patient was not able to focus properly, and I think I did, because of multiple docking attempts, there was an epithelial irregularity that I had induced because of the procedure, and I was expecting that would disappear in about a week's time, and I had already counseled the patient. So a little bit of epithelial irregularity and a slight interface haze was noticed on 3rd day post-operatively.
Exactly. So interface haze or interface fluid syndrome, as it's called, classically does present in the very early stage as just that haze. Okay, so if you've read up on literature, so you'll know that it's graded as per Dawson's grading, and so the initial thing is just a haze, and by the time it goes into grade 3, that's when you actually see the fluid there.
Absolutely.
Okay, and most important point which you raised is that it is caused due to a rise in IOP very often associated with some amount of endothelial dysfunction which happens. So because the IOP is high, it tracks the fluid in from a high pressure to low pressure area, and the only potential space for that fluid to accumulate is in your interface. Okay, so that's
Absolutely.
where you see. So what would be your differential other than the ones that you listed in this in your last slide? And it's a very important learning point for, I think, everybody who is doing refractive surgery, and we've all learned from that mistake. What would be your most important differential for this patient?
Okay. Quite honestly, when I saw the haze in the interface on 3rd post-operative day, I was very, very skeptical. I was thinking of shifting, in fact, from fluorometholone to prednisolone acetate.
Why? What did you think it was?
Because I was thinking it's a sort of Sands of Sahara or or DLK,
Right.
which does not very classically present as what we see in post LASIK. But it does not have the typical Sands of Sahara appearance, but it has a diffuse haze that sort of coagulates later and then form those deposits.
So the most common mistake that is made when you with the interface fluid syndrome is that people mistake it for a DLK because it does present as a haze in the interface, obviously not as classic Sands of Sahara, because again that is a much later thing. And what you do is you step up the steroids because you think it's DLK, and that is compounding the problem and worsening your interface fluid.
Absolutely.
Okay? So it's very important to pick this up very early, suspect it early, and as you rightly said, a normal IOP check in the center of the cornea is going to be falsely normal or low because of the edema, and if this was, there's fluid clefts there, so it gives a falsely low IOP check. So if you don't have anything better, digital tonometry, just do with your fingers is enough. This thing, check for that, because sometimes they'll be really high and it will still show as a normal pressure, or if you have a tonopen, then peripheral tonopen checking. So those are very important. And even, of course, you started the IOP lowering medication, but just stopping the steroid or stepping down the steroid actually would have helped also. But good, if you gave the anti-glaucoma medication, it does hasten or hasten the process. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for those points.
So I just had a couple of questions for
Yes, ma'am.
One is, I think what your case highlighted is that even the low dose steroids like FML can cause a pressure rise in a short span, like a couple of weeks. So one needs to at the back of your mind. And it wasn't clear to me how long after surgery the patient presented, because you said he came many days later. So did the problem get worse by the second week or the third week? That wasn't really very clear. And you got the problem sorted just in time, because we know that unchecked IOP rise in young patients can damage the optic nerve. So if a patient is left untreated for 3 to 4 weeks, it can have disastrous effects. Just one very simple question. The moment the patient has a myopic shift, that is when you would start suspecting, a drop in vision and the haze. So I wanted to know, why does the patient develop a myopic shift in case of, corneal edema or even epithelial ingrowth, where the moment the corneal thickness increases, that's when you get myopic shift. So that could also have given you the earliest to keep look at the cornea more carefully, and you might have been able to pick up the cleft.
Absolutely, ma'am. Now, two things that you highlighted. One is when the patient, I had seen the patient only till third postoperative day, and I had just seen slight interface haze, which I personally was attributing to my dissection. I thought that probably when I was dissecting, maybe that is caused that.
True. So unlike LASIK, we know that in SMILE you need to give a couple of.
Because when the patient went to the doctor in Nasik, and the doctor called me, I specifically asked him if the interface is clear, and he said the interface looks absolutely clear, and the epithelium also looks absolutely clear. But I was suspecting that probably because of the epithelial remodeling, increase in epithelium cause an increase in the can cause a myopic shift. So that was the logic that was running in my head, that it is probably an epithelial change which without any imaging we won't be able to capture it. So almost up to a diopter and a half of epithelial remodeling can happen with just about 10 to 15 microns of epithelial change. So that was the thing that was running at the back of my mind. The only thing was that the doctor who was seeing the patient was reducing the steroids, tapering it down, and then was increasing the steroids again, because he also wasn't sure as to what exactly is happening. And the patient was feeling better by putting the steroids in terms of the ocular surface. That's why he continued putting the steroids for up to 6 weeks. So he was, when he came to me, he was saying, मैं कभी 2 बार डालता हूँ, कभी 3 बार डालता हूँ, जब जरूरत पड़ती डालता हूँ. So that was one thing, which is why I decided to actually see the patient clinically, because by that time I was just seeing the patient on all the imaging modalities.
So I think another learning lesson is I would always want to see my patient at 2 weeks post surgery.
Absolutely. There's no denying that.
And another important point is that this syndrome doesn't necessarily happen in the early post-op period. Okay, so that's another very important thing to remember. Even if the patient is like a year after surgery and has used steroids for anything from an allergy to anything, I've seen patients even late, because it's a potential space, and if he's a steroid responder or for some reason his IOP is going up, the same thing can happen even late post-op. So don't think that just like unlike DLK, which can happen only early, this usually can happen even late. So always remember to keep it in mind.
Yes, right? Absolutely.
One last thing is I want to know how did you manage him later? How long did he need Diamox, and why did you choose dorzolamide as a topical anti-glaucoma agent because we know it can affect the endothelial function, and I might have chosen another drug. So I wanted to know the logic behind and how long did the pressure take to come down and normalize, and did he eventually
the pressure, ma'am, actually took just 3 days to normalize. To be very honest, dorzolamide was started only because of the availability of the medication near his pharmacy. So he saw me, he went to the pharmacy and he said, "Doctor, yahi dawai mil raha hai, main yahi shuru karu kya?" And I had no other option
to just drug of choice ideally in this case.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
What topical anti-glaucoma agent would have been the drug of choice?
I would have preferred brimonidine in this case.
Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, I would avoid dorzolamide or the topical azoles in case of endothelial suspected disease.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll take one question from the audience which says that what could be the etiology of PISK? Is it a poor endothelium function? And also if it is, do you suspect it? Can you suspect it pre-op by using specular count for them?
That's a very good question again. As a part of, sorry, is it for me?
No. Yeah, Natasha, go ahead. I don't know. Mukesh will tell who has answers.
Anyone, both are experts, please.
So specular, as it is apart from clinical examination, is a part of our routine preoperative refractive surgery examination. So if there is any suspicion or the slightest deviation, we definitely defer surgery in such cases. We have a very strict criteria for inclusions in refractive surgery. Sharon?
Yeah, I'm just going to add a small caveat to that. So we don't routinely do specular in our center for everyone, unless of course the pachymetry is very high or something, or clinically we are seeing something. But that apart, PISK is not directly due to this particular syndrome is not directly due to compromised endothelial function. It's a transient endothelial dysfunction due to the change in the IOP. So these patients need not have any specular change before or pre-op, and there's really no way to predict that somebody could develop this. So specular to diagnose this syndrome is not really.
So it's essentially seen in steroid responders.
Wouldn't help.
Okay, thank you. I think Mukesh, can we move on?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
We now have our third case presentation by POS faculty, Dr. Ridhima Bagli. She is again very young practicing ophthalmologist in Pune and is the director of MediLaser Smile Center that's there in Pune. And she has done a fellowship from Narayan Netralaya, Bangalore, and she was a past consultant there also. And without wasting further time, Dr. Ridhima, can you share your screen and start the case presentation, please?
Thank you very much, Mukesh, for the introduction. And I would like to thank POS, Dr. Gitanjali Sharma ma'am, Dr. Mukesh for giving me this opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I would start straight to the case. I'm going to discuss a case where I failed the first time. So it's interesting for me. She was a 56-year-old female patient who came to me, very anxious patient. She came with blurring of vision and diplopia in her left eye of 15 days duration. She had both her cataract surgery done 15 years prior in another city when she was like 41 years of age. And she told me forthright that even if you put drops in my eyes, I don't dilate at all. Like that is a known fact. I've never dilated well. So I said, fine, let's go ahead and do an evaluation for you. Her right eye was perfectly normal, but the complaint and her best vision in her left eye was about 6-9 parts with a very small error of minus 0.75. And she actually, it was not that she was poor She was absolutely non-dilating. Her pupil did not go beyond 2 to 3 millimeters. It didn't make any difference if you put drops in her eyes. So her left eye showed an inferiorly sunken intraocular lens, like the inferior half of the pupil only was pseudophakic. The superior half you could see was aphakic, and that's why she was having diplopia. I could see the posterior pole was fine, but I could not make out any details of the bag or the IOL or vitreous or rent. I could not really make out much, but her visual symptoms were quite disturbing, and I decided that, okay, we need to go ahead and explore. I told putting artificially dilating the pupil, and then we will decide, depending on what we find, whether we
Is Ridhima audible to everybody?
No, there is some, her network is an issue. Just a minute, huh? Let me just communicate to her.
Okay, in the meanwhile, can I ask one question to Dr. Natasha?
Yes, Dr. Saurabh, you can.
Yeah, for marking the cornea for toric, do you use some different ink for that?
I use the one that comes with the Biscote. That
Okay,
allows
Gentian violet. Okay.
Yes, so it allows the UV. I mean, it does not block the UV because it's an infrared, so you can still see it underneath on the
iris can be seen
underneath the appellation cone. Yes.
Saurabh, that was actually very good dissection. You know, the way you release the pupil, it was quite atraumatic. Okay, I think.
Yes,
Ridhima's back.
Ridhima, maybe you can go to the third slide.
Yeah, can you see? Okay, can you see the video now?
Yeah, we could see you, but we couldn't hear you.
Okay, yeah. So this was what happened once I put in the iris hooks.
Dr. Ridhima, your screen. Yeah.
Start seeing.
Yeah.
So this is the iris hooks being placed, and as you can see, I found a 3-piece IOL, and the IOL was entirely in the sulcus. It was inferiorly decentered, but when I fiddled around a bit, explored it, tried to redial it, I found that the entire IOL is in the sulcus. The bag is intact. The bag is fibrosed and closed, and the IOL, there wasn't any rent, there wasn't any. And I was actually thinking, I mean, it looked quite clean and neat to, do something very drastic. So this was what I found. It was a 3-piece IOL in the sulcus, and the bag was closed because it was like the cataract surgery was done 15 years.
Dr. Mukesh, there is again problem of audio. Can you do something?
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe if she can use headphones.
Ma'am, it's internet issues at her place. I spoke to her. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Ridhima, are you back?
Yes.
Yeah, please carry on.
I'm so sorry for this. So then I'm sorry for the internet being so unstable, but I found that I thought that since I cannot make out any rent or zonular dehiscence, I could probably just reorient the same.
Ridhima, why don't you try to put your video off?
The video is off now, ma'am.
No, we can see you.
Your video also
Your
off.
video.
But I have one more video to show. So I'll
not the one in the presentation, your own profile video.
Start video on the left hand side.
Yeah, that might just help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now share screen.
Yeah. Okay. So immediately after I repositioned the IOL, I saw her on the slit lamp and it all seemed fine, but I was not really, my fingers were crossed. When I saw her the next day, the IOL had sunk again. It was again the same thing. And then I started thinking as to what I should actually do. So usually the causes of IOL subluxation, like if a single haptic or the whole IOL is in the sulcus, it could decenter. Or if the IOL is in the bag, if the zonules have given way or the capsular bag has contracted or there's a rent. But in this situation, I thought that, okay, the capsular zonular support did not seem inadequate at all. And luckily I had a 3-piece IOL in the sulcus. So if the bag could have been opened, I would have preferred to put the IOL back into the bag and that would have solved the problem. But because I could not place the IOL in the bag, I thought that I need to secure this IOL with an optic capture. So usually we do an optic capture when we have a posterior capsular rent and we capture the optic into the anterior capsulotomy or the rexes that we have done. But in this situation, okay, this is if I would not have had adequate zonular support, I would have probably thought of putting in a, this is the other causes of subluxation. But in my particular case, this is what I envisioned, that this is the closed bag. These are the superior zonules which are intact. The inferior zonules given way and one of the haptics has slipped through it. So my plan was to make a posterior capsulotomy with a cutter is what I had planned, and then to capture the optic through the bag into the anterior vitreous. So this is what I planned to do. And so I took her up for a second time. The IOL was again inferiorly subluxated entirely. And as you can see, again, I went in with hooks, and this time I made sure that I did not just free the optic or the base of the haptics. I did not just try and rotate the IOL, but entirely disentangled the entire haptic right up to the tip of the haptic, so that to make sure that even if the tip was kind of stuck somewhere in the zonules, it was free now. And as I had planned, this is the cutter. I went behind the IOL and made a posterior capsular opening in the bag and an anterior vitrectomy. Viscoat is now being placed behind the posterior capsulotomy that I have done. And then the IOL is just take a dialer, and now we have to place the optic behind the posterior capsulotomy. So the first stage can go in pretty easily, but it was not easy for me to put in the second.
So I think there is some serious issues. It's been 3 or 4 times that we have got cut. So I think we'll move on to some question answer sessions. Judges.
So she can just conclude, or she can't get through to us.
She just can't get through, I guess.
Okay, even her audio is not reaching us?
Yeah.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Can she log in on her phone?
Yeah, something like that, so that at least she can discuss the.
Yeah, she can if.
Yeah.
Maybe just ask her to ring in on her phone. She can use her phone to connect. Maybe just speak.
So while we are waiting.
Can you hear me now, Sharon?
She's back. Yeah.
Yes, Ridhima, we can hear you. So you can discuss. Yeah, continue discussing.
Yeah, I'm just. So dial, and there can be lots of different ways in which you can either with a CTR, or you need to exchange it with an iris fixated or scleral fixated IOL, but that would depend on the anatomy, the cause of the subluxation, and what one is actually confident and comfortable doing. So thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. I think you managed the case really well.
Beautiful.
In fact, it reminds me of when I was doing my fellowship in 1990 at LV Prasad, and those were the days we did an ECC IOL, the ECI IOL as we called it. And there was this young lady who was like 40, 45 years old, and she was like operated and brilliant, and she comes like at about 2 months, exactly the same, diplopia and sunset syndrome. And that's when we were taught what is sunset syndrome. And I remember one of the senior consultants dialed the lens in, and she comes 1 week follow up, and the lens again is sunk. And then, you know, he said in his usual way, he said, this stupid lens, that's the problem. He took it out and put another lens, and a third time it sunk.
Same thing.
Those were the days we used AC IOLs very, very rampantly. So he just said, forget this, we put an AC IOL, and that was it. So probably the lady had a zonular dehiscence, just as your case did, and that's why the lens being in the sulcus would sink each time, find by gravity, you know, the break in the zonules, and slip down. So I think you managed it really well, really well.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any comments from the audience? Anybody would like to ask
if
questions?
it was a little broken, but from what I heard and saw, Ridhima, is that one of the haptics was going inferiorly through a zonular dehiscence. Is that what it was? Okay.
Yes.
So otherwise it was all intact. So any other tips which you could share for everyone's benefit as to pre-operatively, would there be any other, say an imaging or any other test you could have done to sort of visualize what was happening behind the iris? Because obviously there was not much. So would a UBM or an ASOCT, would anything like that help in these cases?
To image the zonules, I think it's behind, like,
not the zonules, but the lens, and you know how it's sitting, and the posterior capsule.
Maybe just like a UBM probably be much better than an ASOCT. Like a UBM would still.
Yeah, I seem to have lost her again, but I think what she's trying to say.
A better picture.
Yeah, maybe Ridhima, if you put off the video, the voice would be more audible.
Or you can connect from your phone.
Stop my video now.
You can use the Zoom from your phone, and then, you know, it'll use the data, and you won't have a problem.
But yes, no doubt, very beautifully managed, heroically managed. So it was lucky that everything else was intact. So if it was not, if there was significant, you know, as you said, zonular dehiscence, or the bag was not intact, what would be your next option? That was not very clear. If you could just re-explain, at least on audio.
So my option was like, if the IOL was in the bag and the zonules were the problem, like there was, like the bag had contracted, zonules had given way in one part, in one quadrant, I thought of putting a CTR to just strengthen the zonules. But I thought the bad appular sealed new scleral fixated IOL. That was what my plan was. But everything looked quite clean to, mess up that much and explant it and put in a new IOL. So I think just fixating the same one with this was a less traumatic insult to the eye.
And how did you position the haptics? Because were the zonules broken in the, how many quadrants or how many clock hours of the zonules? Did you get a vague
Honestly,
idea?
ma'am, I couldn't see any zonular dehiscence. Like I couldn't. I assumed there must be, but I couldn't. On table, the bag was properly centered, fibrosed.
Right.
So I couldn't. I just assumed there's some zonule somewhere that has given way that's causing the haptic to slide through, but I couldn't see anything. So initially I had tried to position the haptics horizontally, but that hadn't worked. Again,
Right.
one of the haptics had slipped down. So this time I tried to actually, once I'm capturing the optic, I don't think like the position of the haptics would matter that much. I don't think it would slip now that I am capturing. So I don't think I paid that much. I would have liked it to be horizontal for sure. But I think I just made sure that the inferior haptic was totally out of the area of zonular dehiscence. Like even the tip of the haptic was out of that area and moving freely and rotating before I did the optic capture.
Right. So for discussion in case, what if this had been a single piece foldable lens that had?
So I would have removed it, ma'am. I would have removed it.
Yeah.
I would not have left a single piece.
And would you?
And I would have put in like a 3-piece instead and an
Oh, I think we've lost her again.
No, can you hear me, ma'am? So I would have, if it was a single piece lens, I would have removed it and probably I may have put a 3-piece lens and optic.
Right. And would you consider a posterior chamber iris clip? There are a lot of patients being fitted with those, and they seem to be doing pretty well. Would you have kept? I would have kept a standby probably.
Yes, I would have. But at this point, when I had done this case, I was not very confident. I have tried it now, but at that point, I was very comfortable only with scleral fixated IOLs. But now, probably, yeah, I would keep an iris posterior clip iris claw lens ready.
So just to run through, we have some other options as well, right? Like we have the SFIOL, the Yamane technique, and
yes.
So I mean, we could discuss all these, but I wanted to ask Mukesh.
Yes,
do we have any audience questions for Ridhima?
Yes, ma'am. We have actually questions for Dr. Saurabh also. If you can start with Dr. Saurabh.
Yes.
Yeah, just a minute.
So that's excellent, Ridhima. Thank you, and I think you
did
very well
much.
in spite
Excellent
of
presentation.
all the problems.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the interruptions. Thank you.
No, but it was still great. It was still great. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a question from the audience which says that which contact lens is better for your case if you want to use, if you want to go for contact lenses.
I think by contact lens, I mean for trial. I think for trial, this was a fairly regular cornea. So even soft contact lens will be good option. There was toricity of 2 cylinders. So yeah, of course, these trial lenses will not be available with that kind of power. So maybe a RGP with a over refraction would be fair enough.
Yeah, and there is a question, Nitin, one more question, that any explanation why the vision improved beyond the BCVA, which was pre-op?
Yeah, as I said, a couple of things, the pupil was decentered. So maybe there were some aberrations which were there. I don't have 4 years back, I didn't have a aberrometry. So whether that had, reduced the visual, that is one. And second, of course, he had high refractive error of almost -8 spherical equivalent. So that, and he was not using glasses at all for last 10 to 11 years. So not using glasses themselves can cause a reduction in vision. Even after correction, it may take a little bit of time. And of course, the minification factor because of the high spherical equivalent minus lens glasses will be there. So all 3 factors I was considering.
Okay. Some questions for Dr. Natasha. How long do you recommend steroid in a routine cases? Was the patient using steroid for a longer time?
So it depends. It's different for different patients. That's why I would my patients at least till a month's time. So I see them immediate post-op at 1 week and at 1 month. After 2 weeks. But in surface ablation, the soft steroids or the surface steroids go on for at least 8 weeks. If I am expecting some changes, like in case of DLK, then I continue steroids as long as is necessary. Sometimes I also start the patients if the DLK is too much and I don't want to go ahead and wash the interface. Then I would even speculate on starting oral steroids in these cases.
Okay. And only is the IOP only factor differentiating between the PISK and DLK in this? And that is the number one question. Suppose if we don't have tonopen, what should we do to differentiate between the two?
One mistake that I did was that I did not do a thorough clinical examination. That I should have followed up the patient myself. So sometimes there is no replacement for a good clinical examination, and this can be very if it is DLK, it will be very classically seen on the interface. So that is one way. And if talking of IOP measurement, if like Sharon rightly mentioned, if you don't have any fancy equipment to measure the IOP, sometimes digital or old school methods like digital palpation can help decide the IOP in certain cases. But if not, then we can, TCT would be the best way, post-refractive surgery. But if we don't have access to such equipments, then tonopen or iCare or any of these methods should work.
So I just had one comment. What is very interesting is, unlike native eye, one that has not had a flap or an interface, if the pressure shot up, you would see a little ground glass appearance and microcystic edema, which is very telltale of a raised IOP. As against that, a patient who has had LASIK or a SMILE, you don't see microcystic edema because the fluid will collect in the cleft.
Absolutely.
So that's
exactly what happens.
Any change in vision, any shift, a refractive surprise, which was not, because day one he was 6'6", right? So if he drops
yes,
vision,
he was.
That's the very first thing one would look at.
Yes.
And it's quite an acute drop. So unlike a refractive change, a regression or an aphasia or what you were thinking, it's an acute, relatively acute thing which happens over a few days, the change the patient would notice. So that would be another clue to, thinking that it's not a regression or something. It's something totally different happening in the eyes.
Absolutely. It's just that whenever the patient, went to the doctor, the consulting doctor in Nasik, the doctor constantly kept saying that his vision is 6/6. He's just complaining of glare, and my logical explanation to glare was there's something wrong in the optics. I never thought of asking him to refract the patient. So he didn't, of course, do the refraction of the patient. I was considering probably just the epithelial remodeling which is causing the glare, and the interface haze that I had seen on third post-operative day, and I had attributed that to probably the dissection. So those were the two things just on clinical history that were running in my mind.
One point I would like to add, because I am also a retina surgeon, retina surgeon cannot see a patient without getting OCT done. So all my refractive patients also undergo corneal OCT at each post-op visit. So I think there are two important things which we know, like this one, like pressure induced, I think we can know. Another thing is epithelial remodeling, which can be picked up quite early if we are using OCT, which does the epithelial thickness mapping. I think one of the cases I had presented during the NN meet was the epithelial remodeling which happened afterwards, and similar to that, the patient had myopic shift after a month, and we didn't know what was the reason because everything was fine. And because I had taken serial OCTs right from pre-op to post-op, I could see that the epithelial thickness was slowly growing with time. So I think OCT is a good investigation to do in all refractive patients.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Sorry, I had a question for Saurabh. Would you have considered surface ablation or LASIK in this patient? I mean, why did you prefer SMILE over the other option?
For my cases?
Yes.
For my case?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted your opinion actually, because you're more experienced with the excimer. So how will you treat a case where the pupil tracking, pupil recognition is difficult?
Right. So of course, once you've got the pupil centered, I might have erred towards a surface ablation rather than, I don't do SMILE. So that's my first. So with the LASIK versus a surface ablation, I would have probably preferred, or like I said, the piggyback lens would have been the simplest option. But a surface
would you choose -8?
But
the Pachy was good, right?
What about the tracking during the excimer?
Pachy can be put off.
But
like we do it
again with the cylinder, with the cylinder especially, then you're running a slight risk on that.
I have done on nystagmus. I think you must have done on nystagmus with low this thing. We can hold the globe and
hold the globe. Yes.
But then again, when we are expecting good vision, we don't want at least aberrations to occur, or decentered ablation, which will give more headaches than what.
No, but I think the crux in your case is that he needed a medical fitness to join his job soon, right? So a surface ablation anyway would take really long.
About surface ablation, the only issue is tracking. How will you, be sure that you are ablating perfectly without any movements in between?
No, I mean, unless the patient moves, like a PTK mode, you can put the tracker and tracking off and...
I mean, that's what my personal experience is, that patient cannot be relied upon for the centration particularly.
Dr. Saurabh,
I don't know. I mean, you will be able to, and also there high refractive error, so it's a longer treatment.
But Dr.
So maybe
Saurabh, with the pupil...
Mukesh has male 90, so it might, clear everything in seconds, but...
I think even with the wavelight, it should.
Yeah, it's very fast.
It's very fast.
With Dr. Saurabh, with the pupil that you got post-operatively, if you do repeat scan, I think it is fairly regular. You can still do pupil tracking with post-operative. Yeah, it wouldn't be a problem. I don't think so.
So essentially, here the patient had to be back for his medical fitness soon. So I think that itself could be the biggest decider.
Yeah.
We get a lot of young people coming in for job fitness or the police recruitment and all, and so where even if it's like a -1, I would still do a LASIK because he needs to be fit for that medical exam.
But the biggest advantage, like you rightly mentioned, is that there's no dynamic cyclotorsion intraoperatively with SMILE. So that is the biggest advantage in such a case.
I think if you have got this kind of case, you should buy SMILE for that case. Rest all you can manage.
There are enough centers. I'm sure that you're welcome to go across.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
questions for Ridhima, I think. Right?
Ridhima?
Yes.
Yes, she's hanging in there, right?
Yes.
There is one question to Dr. Ridhima. I'll just read it out. In the above case with contracted zonules capsule unstable complex, is it better to remove it and fix a lens to the iris or to the sclera, and subsequently back complex may stabilize?
Here the bag and zonules were not unstable actually, like the back complex was stable, like it looked absolutely normal. So in this case, it was not a good idea to explant the IOL, but definitely if it had been, then that would have been an option, yes. In this situation, the back complex was very stable.
One last question from the audience. Can you suture the haptic to the iris in such case?
If the back complex, if the capsular support is inadequate, it is definitely an option to suture the haptic to the iris posteriorly. And we can do those mechanical sutures and suture the same IOL, in fact, can also be sutured to the back of the iris, but only if the capsular support is inadequate. So instead of doing a scleral fixated IOL, a iris fixated IOL can then be an option.
But one must
In that case, you might as well do a posterior. Yeah.
Hi, good evening to all.
Hi, sir.
Hello.
Hi. रिधिमा, शेवटी तू काय केलं? पोस्टर कॅप्चर केलं ना?
Oh, sir.
We lost you so many times. I didn't know exactly what did you do at the end.
सो मी तीच आयोल घेतली आणि पोस्टिरियर कॅप म्हणजे जी बॅग फायब्रोज होती त्याच्यामध्ये कॅप्सुलोटॉमी केली आणि ते ऑप्टिक त्याच्यामध्ये कॅप्चर केलं त्या बॅग पोस्टिरियर कॅप्सूल मध्ये.
Fantastic. Innovative.
Thank you, sir. So it was not, I was not confident I would be able to do it, but once you put yourself to it, you'd be surprised as to what you're capable of. So that's the message for everybody.
Did you consider doing posterior capsulorhexis?
With the Rex, no. I thought it would be easier to do it with a cutter, honestly.
How large was the opening, Ridhima, you made?
I wanted to make it about 4.5 to 5 millimeters.
Just to overlap. Just to overlap.
Just short of the optic diameter.
I think fibrous capsule helped you.
Yeah. Yes.
Because we sometimes see in silicone oil operated patients, when we have removed the oil and we want to do just opening the poster capsule, it's very difficult sometimes to even open the poster capsule with a cutter, and eventually we have to use some needle or something to make an opening. So I think whatever opening you made, it was pretty stable.
Yes, sir.
I think one of the things, Ridhima, is that patient had IOL in the sulcus to start with, right?
Correct. Entirely, yes.
So most likely the surgeon has put that in the sulcus because there was a dialysis and thought that it will remain stable and placed it. And that's a common mistake that many surgeons do, that on table, if they feel they are IOL is centered, it will remain like that, but it decenters obviously.
So if there's a small dialysis, in fact, you should put the IOL in the bag. Like that 3-piece IOL haptic would have actually given that zonule some strength over there.
So you have to stabilize the bag and then.
So I think we have had a wonderful discussion of all the 3 cases, pure refractive surgery cases here. And I'll like Dr. Gitanjali Sharma to add a comments, and then followed by Dr. Sachin Kabra, please.
Yeah, it was an excellent case discussion. Dr. Saurabh, we thank you. Dr. Sharon Madam, we thank you. You have come, you have joined us from Narayan Nethralaya. Great to see you over here. Natasha, it was always pleasure to hear to you. Ridhima, you have done a wonderful case and we all appreciate. A lot of clappings for all 3 of you, all 3 young dynamic. Sangeeta, it's always good to have your opinions and your expert comments about everything. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mukesh, for moderating so well. And may I now request Dr. Sachin to say vote of thanks from POS.
Yes. Hi, everyone. It was nice to listen to everybody. To thank our President, Dr. Gitanjali Sharma, and Secretary, Dr. Mukesh, for taking this initiative and executing it so beautifully. Special thank to our guest, case presenter, Dr. Saurabh Patwardhan, and our host faculty, Ridhima and Natasha, for excellent cases. A great thank to our judges, Dr. Sangeeta Wagh and Dr. Sharon D'Souza, for excellent discussion. And special discussion on Marathi also, which I like personally, being a And like Saurabh, also I'm a retina surgeon. So after a long time, I got to listen to some refractive, so good knowledge for me also personally. A special thank to our moderator, Dr. Mrs. Khere, who handled it so beautifully, a lot of technical issues. The Pune weather is very romantic today, so maybe that was the reason we lost signals in between. And special thanks to all of you for staying long and listening to all of us. And stay safe, stay indoors, and have a great evening ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.